Welcome to the Hospital Finance Podcast, your go-to source for information and insights that can help you stay ahead of the challenges impacting healthcare finance. And now, the host of the Hospital Finance Podcast, Michael Passanante.
Hi, this is Mike Passanante, and welcome back to the Hospital Finance Podcast. Today is a special episode from HFMA's annual meeting 2018 here in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I am joined by several people from our team here at Besler. To my left is DeLicia Pierce, who is the Director of Reimbursement Services at the firm. I'm also joined by Jon Besler, who is our President and CEO, and to my right, which you can't see, is Laura Legg, who is our Solutions Strategy Director. She's very much involved in revenue integrity. So we're going to get perspective on a few different issues, things that we've heard at the conference, things that we've seen on the exhibit floor, and try to give you some sense as to what some of the themes and topics are and how they tie in to the future of what we're all doing in healthcare finance. So everyone here, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. Welcome. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So we were chatting just before we hit the record button here on the podcast about some of the themes that jumped out really in the opening keynote, and they involve things like more analytics, which kind of surprised me for the finance suite, because it feels like we have so much already available to us. But I want to talk about that a little bit more. Consumerism in healthcare, and certainly as part of the revenue cycle. And then, what we've seen in some of the sessions are things that maybe never made their appearance here at an annual conference before. I'm not sure, but I saw things like blockchain and artificial intelligence. And so we're broaching topics that are maybe out of the comfort zone of a lot of people and may seem futuristic, but they're probably not that far off. So let's start talking a little bit about those themes. And why don't we start off with consumerism? So Jon,
Sure. Well, I think it's an inevitable reality of the future of what we have here facing our healthcare providers, facing our individuals and consumers, family and friends. I could think of years ago taking my kids to the doctor and going to the doctor myself and waiting for information post-visit. And now we've got solutions that are out in the market that are at the tip of your fingers. And I think the next phase of that is getting that data not only into the hands of consumers more consistently, but all of the education, and you referred to the term analytics, but when I think of analytics, I think of data that is useful, and that's really the definition of how I look at it. So more analytics might be a ubiquitous term that people use, but I don't know if really the phrase should be the right analytics or the right data at the right time to really meet that consumer's needs and help patients take better care of themselves. Because ultimately, in the healthcare environment, we need to get better and more proactive in helping consumers manage their lifestyle. So we can start to reduce the costs, which is obviously a consistent theme that we've heard over the years with all of our clients, all the providers, and certainly the government. How do we manage the cost of care for folks in the long term? And I don't think we're too far off from really putting that data, putting those analytics into the hands of people that can actually make decisions on their own behalf.
Now, it's great points, and what's interesting to me is we think about, at least I think initially most of us think about consumerism in healthcare, about more leaning towards the clinical experience. So, how did it feel when I was treated by my physician? What was that experience like? Did I feel satisfied? But here at a conference like this, it actually extends more and deeper into the overall experience with the provider in terms of how were you handled at registration? What was your experience when you got to talking about things like the bill, right? How did that make you feel? And then you're going to have to deal with that maybe for weeks or months to come. So Laura, you were mentioning some experiences you had in your own personal life with family member, and certainly some of that comes out. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, for the first time, my husband, who has diabetes, he went to see his doctor last week, and he came home 2 hours later, logged on, and got into his record and was able to see the results of all of his tests and even the note written by his physician. He was very pleased about that because he's used to waiting a day, maybe even 2 days, to get any information. So that is really good for him.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting point. So one of the sessions I went to on artificial intelligence spoke specifically about diabetes management and how diabetics have to make hundreds of decisions throughout the day, not only for their intake and their care and all the. Fortunately, I'm not diabetic, but I can imagine how burdensome it is to make sure that you're doing the right thing at the right time to manage insulin levels and things like that. And the next phase of that, which this firm talked about, was not only working with the doctors to manage that, but then how do we put an app or a reminder or something onto something ubiquitous as a cell phone or the Fitbit or whatever it might be, to make sure that person is receiving those triggers real time to make that decision to take their insulin shot, to call the physician if something's going wrong. So it's the speed of that process that I think we're going to see a lot more increase of. I mean, I think it's wonderful that we can now see patient records or see personal records on a device or on a computer. But even that, when you think about it, isn't as proactive as that buzzer going off and saying, make this decision now to better manage your care, to better manage your health.
So let's turn to analytics for a minute. And DeLicia, I want to get your take on this, because I was a little bit taken back, and maybe I'm just not as close to it as you are, and coming from working in the hospital finance suite. But I think it was the opening session by HFMA's president, and he talked about this need or this desire of CFOs to have more analytics. And the reason I was taken back is the thought came to my mind, like, geez, how much more information can you take in? We have all these different software packages and products and spreadsheets and God knows what coming through. What else do you need as a CFO?
Well, one of the things that the hospitals, just from an operations standpoint, need real time is data to tell them who's in house, who is going to be discharged, when they can be discharged, just key performance indicators that need to be readily available every day throughout the day, either by utilization review or by the medical records, discharge units when they're discharging them, so that they know the beds are open. Not only that, just when you're looking at your ER, that throughput, how fast can you get the data at your fingertips to get those patients through to either discharge or admitting them to the floors, and making sure that you have the availability to admit those patients. Because the faster you get them to the floor, the sooner you can get the medicine that they need, and the faster you can get them home where they really ultimately want to be. And one of the things that y'all mentioned earlier about getting your electronic records the next day or the same day, I use Doc on Demand all the time, and I'm using it on my phone. They're getting the data to the pharmacy to get the drugs out. But back to what you had originally asked me is that, like for S10, those daily indicator reports that we can deliver based off of the hospital's information that they're downloading help us make decisions on what we should do, looking at how the S10 is going to be impacted when they file their Medicare cost report, knowing where you're going to sit in the pool of everybody else, as everybody's fighting for the same dollars. So the analytics are so important, and they will drive everything in the future as it relates to healthcare, consumerism, and everything that is all encompassing of healthcare.
Do you think that hospitals are going to measure their financial performance a little bit differently going forward? And what I mean is, they brought up the concept of ROI around, I would call it population management in a way, but it's probably not the right term. But really looking at the social determinants of health and what's making investments within your community that could help reduce readmissions or really contribute to a healthier population that you're serving. But you can't just write the check for that and walk away, right? You have to know over time what that longitudinal data looks like, right?
Yeah, number one, you need historical data, and number two, you need real-time data to help monitor those patients and that population. And yes, I mean, if you can control the cost, you can get the patients healthier, and they're not having to be admitted to your hospital. That's going to actually control costs as well. The one thing that they are definitely moving to is line item costing from a decision support. Doing real-time analysis on new services that you're providing, making sure that if it doesn't meet the ROI for one of but you may have several hospitals, and all of them are providing this specific service, but they're not a center of excellence. Getting it out of the system, moving it to the one facility that has a center of excellence, because the more you treat, the lower you can get your costs.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one of the things that this data is going to give them the ability to do, is real-time evaluation of clinical care, how much it truly costs, and should you be doing that procedure, or should you send that to one of your sister hospitals who is a center of excellence for those types of services. So that would give them real-time data to help from a clinical perspective.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think one thing that, fortunately or unfortunately, as an industry, we haven't looked as deep into partnerships within the community that might be outside of the hospital or outside of the system that might really open the door for some of those improved clinical outcomes. And I can think of in the recent years, we've talked more about providers partnering with FQHCs, federally qualified health centers, to help deliver care in the best, and in most cases, a lower cost modality to not only effectively take care of those patients, but also start to drive costs out of the hospital that might be better suited, certainly in a lower cost center. But it doesn't stop there. Working with community leaders, working with folks across that network, whether they're internal to the hospital and health system or not, I don't think that we can continue to be or shy away from opportunities like that. I think the hospitals really need to be the leaders in their community and continue that partnership and collaboration in a much more robust way.
So we all have a few more things to do here before the meeting is over. Let me just ask you one last question. I'd like to get everybody's opinion on this, because I think it's something that in the years I've been coming to the HFMA meetings, and probably you all have even more under your belt than I do, I'm sure. When does fee-for-service die? I mean, every year we come and we hear about value-based payments, we hear about bundled payments, we hear about all kinds of things, but the reality is we're still in many ways living in a fee-for-service world.
Me personally, I don't think it dies. I think it evolves and changes and becomes named something different, but I think it will always be a part of healthcare. But that's just me.
I don't know if it'll necessarily die, and I, to a certain extent, agree with DeLicia, but I think the real shift for us, and I think subsequent shift in the payment scheme, is empowering the actual consumers of healthcare to really understand not only what it costs, but also how these things get paid. I think if you asked the average consumer in the marketplace about what does their healthcare cost, they really wouldn't know. And transparency is coming along. Price transparency is coming along, and certainly our hospital clients realize that. They understand it, and I think they've done about as well as they could to provide that transparency. But ultimately, it's the consumer that will drive their behavior and their decisions. And I think once they really understand all of the costs that go into it, and how much is it going to cost me for this medication versus that medication, or seeing this doctor at that modality versus another one, I think that's when you'll really start to see a shift in the landscape and the payment schemes.
Can consumers apply that pressure? I mean, where's that going to come from? Is that going to come from insurance companies and providers that are voluntarily going to start giving that up? Is that in their best interest? Or is it consumers that are going to end up putting the hammer down because their co-insurance is getting to be too much?
Well, I think we see it. We're starting to see it now, right? As high deductible plans are really taking hold. And, to a certain extent, consumers are on the hook for a large portion of their health care until they hit their deductible or whatever their plan might call for. So they do have to make those decisions now. Maybe not as uniformly as they might in the future, and certainly not as consistent, or more consistent now than we've seen in the past. But they are starting to drive some of those decisions, as they can choose to either go to a large academic medical center and receive a high cost, high quality treatment, or if they believe that their own health care is better served in a less expensive, lower modality, they're going to make that decision, certainly.
Laura, what are your thoughts on fee-for-service?
Oh, I agree with DeLicia and Jon, and I think it's going to take time for us to change to value-based payment. But I do think that to sum it up, is that it's going to be good for facilities, it's going to be good for patients, and even for payers in the long run.
great. Well, thank you all for taking a few minutes out of your busy schedule here at the conference. Hope you enjoy the rest of it, and thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Mike.
you.
This concludes today's episode of the Hospital Finance Podcast. For show notes and additional resources to help you protect and enhance revenue at your hospital, visit Besler.com/podcasts. The Hospital Finance Podcast is a production of Besler. Smart about revenue, tenacious about results.